Welcome to the 1,000 Nights and 1 Night. Now, when it was the 360th night, she said, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the prince saw the king rushing in upon them, drawn sword in hand like a furious gull, he asked the princess, 'Is this thy sire?' And she answered, 'Yes.' Whereupon he sprang to his feet, and seizing his sword, cried out at the king with so terrible a cry that he was profound. Then the youth would have fallen on him with the sword, but the king, seeing that the prince was doughtier than he, sheathed his scimitar, and stood till the young man came up to him, where he accosted him courteously, and said to him, 'O youth, art thou a man or a jinni?' Quoth the prince, 'Did I not respect thy right as mine host, and thy daughter's honor, I would spill thy blood. How darest thou fellow me with devils, me that am a prince of the sons of the royal Choros, who, had they wished to take thy kingdom, could shake thee like an earthquake from thy glory and thy dominions, and spoil all thy possessions?' Now, when the king heard his words, he was confounded with awe, with bodily fear of him, and rejoined, 'If thou art indeed be the sons of kings, as thou pretendest, how cometh that thou enterest my palace without my permission, and smirchest mine honor, making thy way to my daughter, and feigning that thou art her husband, and claiming that I have given her to thee to be wife? I have had slain kings and kings' sons who sought her of me in marriage. And now, who shall save thee from my might and majesty, when if I cry out to my slaves and servants, and bade them put thee to the vilest of deaths, they would slay thee forthright? Who shall deliver thee out of my hands?' When the prince heard this speech, the king, he answered, 'Verily, I wonder at thee, and at the shortness and denseness of thy wit. I say me, canst covet for thy daughter a mate comelier than myself? And hast ever seen a stouter hearted man, or one better fitted for a sultan, or more glorious in rank and dominion than I?' Rejoined the king, 'Nay, by Allah, but I would have had thee, O youth, act after the custom of kings, and demand her from me to wife before witnesses, that I might have married her to thee publicly. And now, even were I to marry her to thee privily, yet hast thou dishonored me in her person.' Rejoined the prince, 'Thou sayest sooth, O king, but if thou summon thy slaves and thy soldiers, and they fall upon me and slay me, and thou pretendest that thou wouldest but publish thine own disgrace, and the folk would be divided between belief in thee and belief in thee. Wherefore, O king, thou wilt do well, meseemeth, to turn from this thought, to that which I shall counsel thee.' Quoth the king, 'Let me hear what thou hast to advise.' And quoth the prince, 'What I have to propose to thee is this: either do thou meet me in combat singular, I and thou, and he who slayeth his adversary shall be held the worthier, and having a better title to the kingdom, or else let me at this night, when as dawns the morn, draw out against me thy horsemen and footmen and servants. But first tell me their number.' Said the king, 'They are 40,000 horse, besides my own slaves and their followers, who are the like of them in number.' Then upon the prince said, 'When the day shall break, do thou array them against me, and say to them.' And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 361st night, she continued, 'It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that quoth the prince, when day shall break, do thou array them against me, and say to them, This man is a suitor to me for my daughter's hand, on condition that he shall do battle single-handed against you all. For he pretendeth that he will overcome you, and put you to the rout, and indeed you cannot prevail against him. After which, leave me to do battle with them. If they slay me, then is thy secret the surer guarded, and thine honor the better warded. And if I overcome them, and see their backs, then it is the like of me a king should covet to have me as his son-in-law.' So the king approved of his opinion, and accepted his proposition, despite his awe at the boldness of his speech, and amazed at the pretensions of the prince to meet and fight the whole host, such as he had described to him, being at heart assured that he would perish in the fray, and so he should be quit of him, and freed from the fear of dishonor. Thereupon he called the eunuch, and bade them to go to the wazir without stop and delay, and command him to assemble the whole army, and cause them don their arms and armor, and mount their steeds. So the eunuch carried the king's order to the minister, who straightway summoned the captains of the host, and the lords of the realm, and bade them don their harness of derring-do, and mount horses, and sally forth in battle array. Such was their case. But as regards the king, he sat a long while conversing with the young prince, being pleased with his wise speech, and good sense, and fine breeding. And when it was daybreak, he returned to his palace, and seating himself on his throne, commanded his merry men to mount, and bade them saddle one of the best of the royal steeds, with handsome sally, and housings, and trappings, and bring it to the prince. But the youth said, O king, I will not mount horse till I come to view of the troops and review them. Be as thou wilt, replied the king. Then the two repaired to the parade ground, where the troops were drawn up, and the young prince looked upon them and noted their great number. Afterward the king cried out to them, saying, Ho, all ye men, there is come to me a youth who seeketh my daughter in marriage. And in very sooth, never have I seen a goodlier than he, no, nor a stouter of heart, nor of a doughtier of arm. For he pretendeth that he can overcome you, single-handed, and force you to flight, and that were ye 100,000 in number, yet for him would ye be but a few. Now, when he chargeth down on you, do you receive him upon point of pike and sharp of sabre, for indeed he hath undertaken a mighty matter. Then quoth the king to the prince, Up, O my son, and do thy devoir on them. Answered he, O king, thou dealest not justly and fairly by me. How shall I go forth against them, seeing that I am afoot, and the men be mounted? The king retorted, I bade thee mount, and thou refusest. But choose thou which of my horses thou wilt. Then he said, No one of thy horses pleaseth me. I will ride none but that of which I came upon. Asked the king, And where is thy horse? Atop of thy palace. In what part of my palace? On the roof. Now when the king heard these words, he cried, Out on thee! This is the first sign thou hast given of madness. How can the horse be on the roof? But we shall at once see if thou speakest the truth or lies. Then he turned to one of his chief officers and said to him, Go to my palace, and bring me what thou findest on the roof. So all of the people marveled at the young prince's words, saying to one another, How can a horse come down the steps from the roof? Verily, this is a thing whose like we never heard. In the meantime, the king's messengers repaired to the palace, and mounting to the roof, found the horse standing there, and never had he looked on handsomer. But when he drew near and examined it, he saw that it was made of ebony and ivory. Now the officer was accompanied by other high officers, who also looked on, and they laughed to one another, saying, Was it of the like of this horse that the youth spake? We cannot deem him other than mad. However, we shall soon see the truth of his case. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 362nd night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the high officials looked upon the horse, they laughed one to another, and said, Was it of the like of this horse that the youth spake? We cannot deem him other than mad. However, we shall soon see the truth of his case. Peradventure herein is some mighty matter, and he is a man of high degree. Then they lifted up the horse bodily, and carrying it to the king, set it down before him, and all the lieges flocked round to look at it, marveling at the beauty of its proportions, and the richness of its saddle and bridle. The king also admired it, and wondered at with extreme wonder. And he asked the prince, O youth, is this thy horse? He answered, Yes, O king, this is my horse, and thou shalt soon see the marvel it showeth. Rejoined the king, Then take and mount it. And the prince retorted, I will not mount till the troops withdraw afar from it. So the king bade them retire a bowshot from the horse. Whereupon quoth its owner, O king, see thou, I am about to mount my horse, and charge upon thy host, and scatter them right and left, and split their hearts asunder. Said the king, Do as thou wilt, and spare not their lives, for they will not spare thine. Then the prince mounted, whilst the troops ranged themselves in ranks before them, and said one to the other, When the youth cometh between the ranks, we will take him on the points of our pikes and sharps of our sabres. Quoth another, By Allah, this is a mere misfortune. How shall we slay a youth so comely of face and shapely of form? And a third continued, Ye will have hard work to get the better of him, for the youth had not done this but for what he knew of his own prowess and preeminence of valor. Meanwhile, having settled himself in his saddle, the prince turned the pin of ascent, whilst all eyes were strained to see what he would do. Whereupon the horse began to heave and rock and sway to and fro, and making the strangest of movements ever made, till its belly was filled with air, and it took flight with its rider, and soared high into the sky. When the king saw this, he cried out to his men, saying, Woe to you! Catch him ere he escape. But his wazirs and viceroy said to him, O king, can a man overtake the flying bird? This is surely none but some mighty magician of Marid or the jinn or devil, and Allah save thee from him. So praise thou the Almighty for deliverance of thee, and all thy host from his hand. Then the king returned to his palace after seeing the feat of the prince, and going into his daughter, acquainted her with what had befallen them both on the parade ground. He found her grievously afflicted for the prince, and bewailing her separation from him, wherefore she fell sick in violent sickness, and she took to her pillow. Now when her father saw her on this wise, he pressed her to his breast, and kissing her between the eyes, saith to her, O my daughter, praise Allah Almighty, and thank him for that he hath delivered us from this crafty enchanter, this villain, this low fellow, this thief, who thought only of seducing thee. And he repeated to her the story of the prince, and how he had disappeared in the firmament. And he abused him and cursed him, knowing how dearly his daughter loved him. But she paid no heed to his words, and did but redouble in her tears, and wail, saying to herself, By Allah, I will neither eat meat nor drink drain till Allah reunite me with him. Her father was greatly concerned for her case, and mourned much over her plight. But for all he could do to soothe her, love-longing only increased on her. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 363rd night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the king mourned much over his daughter's plight, but for all he could do to soothe her, his long-loving only increased on her. Thus far concerning the king and Princess Shams al-Nahar. But as regards Prince Kamar al-Akmar, when he had risen high in the air, he turned his horse's head towards his native land, and being alone mused upon the beauty of the princess and her loveliness. Now he had inquired of the king's people the name of the city, and of its king and his daughter, and men had told him that it was the city of Sana'a. So he journeyed with all speed till he drew near his father's capital, and making an airy circuit around the city, alighted on the roof of the king's palace, where he left his horse, whilst he descended into the palace, and seeing its threshold strewn with ashes, thought that one of his family was dead. Then he entered as wont, and found his father and mother and sisters clad in mourning raiment of black, all pale of faces and lean of frames. When his sires descried him, and he was assured that he was indeed his son, he cried out with a great cry, and fell down in a fit. But after a time, coming to himself, threw himself upon him, and embraced him, clipping him to his bosom, and rejoicing in him with exceeding joy and extreme gladness. His mother and sisters heard this, so they came in, and seeing the prince, fell upon him, kissing him, and weeping, and joying with excessive joyance. Then they questioned him of his case. So he told them all, that all had passed from the first to the last, and his father said to him, Praised be Allah for thy safety. O coolth of my eyes and core of my heart. Then the king bade hold high festival, and glad tidings flew through the city. So they beat drums and cymbals, and doffing the weed of mourning, they donned the gay garb of gladness, and decorated the streets and markets, whilst the folks vied with one another who should be the first to give the king joy. And the king proclaimed a general pardon, and opening the prisons, released those who were therein. Moreover, he made banquets for the people with great abundance of eating and drinking for 7 days and nights, and all creatures were gladsome. And he took horse and his son, and rode out with them, that the folk might see and rejoice in him. After a while the prince asked about the maker of the horse, saying, O my father, what hath fortune done with him? And the king answered, Allah never bless him, nor the hour when I set my eyes on him. For he was the cause of thy separation from us, O my son, and he hath lain in gaol since the day of thy disappearance. Then the king bade release him from prison, and sending for him, invested him in a dress of satisfaction, and entreated him with the utmost favor and munience, save that he would not give him his daughter. Whereat the sage raged and sore raged, and repented of that which he had done, knowing that the prince had secured the secret of the steed, and the manner of its motion. Moreover, the king said to his son, I reck thou wilt do not well to go near the horse henceforth, and I more especially not to mount it after this day, for thou knowest not its properties, and belike thou art in error about it. Now the prince had told his father of his adventure with the king of Sana, and his daughter, and said to him, Had the king intended to kill thee, it had done so, but thine hour was not yet come. When the rejoicings were at an end, the people returned to their places, and the king and his son to the palace, where they sat down and fell to eating and drinking and making merry. Now the king had a handsome handmaiden who was skilled in playing the lute. So she took it and began to sweep the strings and sing thereto before the king and his son of separation of lovers. And she chanted the following verses. Deem not that absent breeds in me aught of forgetfulness, which should remember I did you for my remembrance wane. Time dies, but never dies the fondest love for you we bear. And in your love I'll die, and in your love I'll arise again. Now, when the prince heard these verses, the fires of longing flamed up in his heart, and pine and passion redoubled upon him. Grief and regret were sore upon him, and his bowels yearned in him for the love of the king's daughter of Sana. So he rose forthright, and escaping his father's notice, went forth the palace to the horse, and mounting it, turned the pin of ascent, whereupon the bird-like it flew with him high in the air, and soared towards the upper regions of the sky. In early morning his father missed him, and was going up to the pinnacle of the palace in great concern, saw his son rising into the firmament, whereat he was sore afflicted, and repined in all penitence that he had not taken the horse and hidden it. And he said to himself, By Allah, if but my son return to me, I will destroy the horse, that my heart may be rest concerning my son. He fell again weeping and bewailing himself. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 364th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the king again fell to weeping and bewailing himself for his son. Such was his case. But as regards the prince, he ceased not flying on through the air till he came to the city of Sa'ana, and alighted on the roof as before. Then he crept down steadily, and finding the eunuch asleep as of wont, raised the curtain, and went on little by little, till he came to the door of the princess's alcove chamber, and stopped to listen, when lo! He heard her shedding plenteous tears and reciting verses, while her women slept around her. Presently, overhear her weeping and wailing, quoth they, O our mistress, why wilt thou mourn for one who mourneth not for thee? Quoth she, O ye little wit, he is for whom I mourn of those who forget or who are forgotten. And she fell again to wailing and weeping till sleep overcame her. Whereat the prince's heart melted for her, and his gallbladder was like to burst. So he entered, and seeing her lying asleep without covering, touched her with his hand, whereupon she opened her eyes and espied him standing by her. Said he, "Why all this crying and mourning?" And when he knew him, she threw herself upon him and took him around the neck and kissed him and answered, "For thy sake, and because of my separation from thee." Said he, "O my lady, I have been made desolate by thee all this time." But she replied, "'Tis thou who hast desolated me, and hadst thou tarried longer, I would surely have died." Rejoined he, "O my lady, what thinkest thou of my case with thy father, and how he dealt with me? Were it not for my love of thee, O temptation and seduction of the three worlds, I had certainly slain him and made him a warning to all beholders. But even as I love thee, so I love him for thy sake." Quoth she, "How couldst thou leave me? Can my life be sweet to me after thee?" Quoth he, "Let what hath happened suffice. I am now hungry and thirsty." So she bade her maidens make ready meat and drink, and they sat eating and drinking, conversing, till night was well nigh ended. And when day broke, he rose to take leave to her and depart, ere the eunuch should awake. Shams al-Nahar asked him, "Whither goest thou?" And he answered, "To my father's house, and I plight thee my troth that I will come to thee once in every week." But she wept and said, "I conjure thee by Allah and Almighty, take me with thee whereso thou wendest, and make me not taste anew the bitter gourd of separation from thee." Quoth he, "Wilt thou indeed go with me?" And quoth she, "Yes." Then said he, "Arise, that we depart." So she rose forthright, and going to the chest, arrayed herself in what was the richest and dearest to her of her trinkets and gold jewels of price. And she fared forth, her handmaids rocking not. So he carried her up to the roof of the palace, and mounting the ebony horse, took her behind him, and made her fast to himself, binding her with strong bonds. After which he turned the shoulder pin of ascent, and the horse rose with him high in the air. When her slave women saw this, they shrieked aloud, and told their father and mother, who in hot haste ran to the palace roof, and looking up, saw the magical horse flying away with the prince and the princess. At this the king was troubled with ever-increasing trouble, and cried out again, "O king's son, I conjure thee of Allah, have ruth on me and my wife, and bereave us not of our daughter." The prince made him no reply, but thinking himself that the maiden repented of leaving father and mother, asking her, "O ravishment of the age, say me, wilt thou that I restore thee to thy mother and father?" Whereupon she answered, "By Allah, O my lord, that is not my desire. My only wish is to be with thee wherever thou art, for I am distracted by the love of thee from all else, even from my father and mother." Hearing these words, the prince joyed with great joy, and made the horse fly and fare softly with him, so as not to disquiet her. Nor did they stay their flight till they came in sight of a green meadow, wherein was a spring of running water. Here they alighted and ate and drank, after which the prince took horse again, and set her behind her, binding her in his fear for her safety, after which they fared on till they came in sight of his father's capital. At this the prince was filled with joy, and bethought himself to show his beloved the seat of his dominion, and his father's power and dignity, and give her to know that it was greater than that of her sire. So he set her down in one of his father's gardens without the city, where his parents was wont to take his pleasure, and carrying her into a domed summer house, prepared there for the king, left the ebony horse at the door, and charged the damsel keep watch over it, saying, "Sit here till my messenger come to thee, for I go now to my father to make ready a palace for thee, and show thee my royal estate." So she was delighted when she heard these words, and said to him, "Do as thou wilt." And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 365th night, she said, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the maiden was delighted when she heard these words, and said to him, 'Do as thou wilt.' For she thereupon understood that she should not enter the city but with due honor and worship, as became her rank. Then the prince left her, and betook himself to the palace of the king, his father, who rejoiced in his return, and met him and welcomed him. And the prince said to him, Know that I have brought with me the king's daughter of whom I told thee, and I have left her without the city in such a garden, and come to tell thee that thou mayest make ready the procession of estate, and go forth to meet her, and show her thy royal dignity and troops and guards. Answered the king, with joy and gladness, and straightway bade decorate the town with the goodliest ornaments. Then he took horse and rode out in all magnificence and majesty, he and his host, high officers and household, with drums and kettle drums, fifes and clarions, and all manner of instruments, whilst the prince drew forth of his treasuries jewelry and apparel and what else of the things which kings hoards, and made a rare display of wealth and splendor. Moreover, he got ready for the princess a canopied litter of brocades, green, red, and yellow, wherein he said Indian and Greek and Abyssinian slave girls. Then he left the litter, and those who were therein, and preceded them to the pavilion where he had set her down, and searched, but found not neither princess nor horse. When he saw this, he beat his face, and rent his raiment, and began to wander round the garden, as he had lost his wits, after which he came to the sense, and said to himself, How could she have come at the secret of this horse, seeing I told her nothing of it? Maybe the Persian sage who made the horse hath chanced upon her, and stolen her away in revenge for my father's treatment of him. Then he sought the guardians of the garden, and asked them if they had seen any pass the presence, and said, Hath any one come in here? Tell me the truth, and the whole truth, or I will at once strike off your heads. They were terrified by his threats, but they answered with one voice, We have seen no man enter save the Persian sage, who came to gather healing herbs. So the prince was certified that it was indeed he that had taken away the maiden. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. And so do I cease my tale for the day, until it be morrow.